Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I really want to congratulate you. It's now Thursday, and this is the first panel that I've managed to start on time. So, thank you very much, everybody. So, we have a really exciting event ahead of us. I'm Shuli Ghosh. I am delighted to be moderating this session on innovating for health security, organised by our hosts, IFPMA. And I mean, it is indeed a timely discussion, isn't it? As global health systems are facing a converging number of threats right now, including disease outbreaks, which I know we've all been hearing about, we've all been talking about, and which are currently causing great concern. So during our panel discussion, we will be calling on the experience and knowledge of leading experts in the fields of surveillance, therapeutics, vaccines, diagnostics, and delivery to help us navigate the question of how we respond to these health challenges and the central role played by innovation in global health resilience. So I'm really looking forward to exploring some of the advances that our panelists will speak to as some of the challenges and barriers to preparedness. And they will be taking questions as well. So we very much encourage you to have those ready because we do like to have a dialogue between our speakers and yourselves. But first, to open the session, please welcome David Reddy, Director General of the IFPMA.
Excellencies, distinguished guests and partners, it's great to be with you tonight, and surely thank you for the warm welcome. The title of tonight's meeting is Innovating for Health Security, and I think the recent events have illustrated that the challenges are not isolated events, they're continuous global threats that continue to emerge. We saw that with the hantavirus outbreak and most recently with the Ebola virus outbreak, which has now been declared a public health emergency of international concern. To start, I think we need to ensure that we reflect on people who are affected by this, both those who are ill, but also the insecurity, the challenges it causes within the communities themselves. I'd also like to acknowledge at the start the efforts of our global health leadership, particularly Dr. Tedros and Africa CDC, for the way they have stepped in and coordinated action, but also the way that they have actively tried to instill public confidence at this time through the measures they've taken, including being on site and really prioritizing the current outbreak over and above the World Health Assembly itself. I'd also like to acknowledge the efforts that are now underway from pharmaceutical companies, some of which that are represented in the room today. They're actively engaged, and you're going to hear from leading experts tonight about some of the types of challenges, the thinking that are going into the current response. The experts from industry are currently working with WHO Technical Advisory Group and other experts looking at existing vaccines, antiviral therapies, what might be effective, what might be useful against the current Bundibugyo strain of Ebola. But the outbreak serves as another reminder, and that is that responding effectively is reliant upon rapid surveillance. And in this context, that envelops a number of things, including contact tracing, infection prevention control, and rapid access to the samples and data that give the science really a jump, a lead, so they can begin working expeditiously. On that note, I'd like to congratulate the Centre for Emerging Viral Diseases of the Geneva University Hospital for the rapid sequencing and sharing of the Andes orthohantavirus genomes that caused several deaths on a ship, as you know, recently on an Atlantic cruise. It's an illustration of the type of rapid, transparent, timely sharing of pathogens and data that can really give the global health community a lead on outbreaks. And it also helps to build trust and accelerates the development of the right kind of diagnostics, vaccines, and medicines. And all of those types of activities are underway as a result of this. I think it's also good to reflect at the moment. At times of outbreak, we have to look at what tools are in our cabinets and what can we lean on that might be useful. And therefore, some of the historic work really needs to be brought into focus here. The response to previous Ebola outbreaks demonstrate how companies have supported equitable access to medical countermeasures. And I'll just list some of the ways this has happened. So, firstly, developing vaccines and antivirals, contributing both investigational and licensed doses, supporting the establishment of the global Ebola vaccine stockpile, and actively contributing to long-standing partnerships. And in that regard, I'd like to call out here CEPI, who's also taking some of that Ebola vaccine work forward, and just underscore the critical nature of product development partnerships like CEPI and actually bringing together industry and other stakeholders. We must ensure that this type of approach is enabled and encouraged in the future, including by the PAB system, where work is still ongoing to finalise that, as most of you are aware. So in framing today's discussion, we've brought together leaders from across the full pathway because we need to be thinking end to end. So from surveillance and data to vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics, and then to delivery systems, that full end to end perspective. But health security is only as strong as the links between all of those elements. Now, why health security matters, I think this doesn't really need to be underscored to anybody here. We saw it most recently in COVID, but it's obvious that we're facing converging pressures today. We see persistent and resurgent infectious disease outbreaks. We see climate-driven outbreaks. We see zoonotic spillovers, increasingly interconnected populations, and I'd say also increasingly fragmented political and societal elements, which is another compounding or contributing complexity. We also see this steady rise of antimicrobial resistance that's now contributing to millions of deaths each year, particularly in the antibiotic space. But we also see the rise of resistance in the antiviral space as well. Health security, therefore, is not a sector-specific issue. It's really foundational to societal resilience, economic stability, national security, and societal trust. And trust is a key element here. Despite reforms and investments, vulnerabilities do persist in our systems. So the recently released report from the Global Preparedness and Monitoring Board makes clear that we're not a lot more prepared than we were a decade ago. Some advances have been made, but there are still significant gaps that we need to bridge. So the question is not whether really health security matters or not. It's, are we building it in a way that will deliver quickly, at scale, and equitably to whatever the next threat might be that arises? The landscape, I think, today does hold promise, though, so I don't want to be too gloomy, and I do want to reflect on some of the things that could really energize us moving forward. Innovation is expanding, and what is possible in the preparedness and response continuum can be bettered by that innovation. So I want to start with surveillance and detection. So preparedness, we know, relies on strong surveillance systems, laboratory capability, and data sharing and trust between countries, between partners. But on the positive, real-time data integration, genomic surveillance, and improved analytics that are being integrated today by AI are strengthening the systems and accelerating response. The second is if we look at prevention and vaccines themselves, COVID has shown us what is possible to go from the availability of a sequence to the authorization of a vaccine in 326 days. And this gives rise to the promise of the 100-day mission. It's strange to reflect that 40 years ago, I was working on RNA viruses, and just to look at the type of progress that's been made since then. But actually the progress that we saw during COVID was progress that was built on decades of research that had gone before. It didn't happen overnight. And just to give a reflection on how things have changed, the time taken 40 years ago to sequence an mRNA genome like Ebola would have been 2 to 3 years. Today, with modern technology, it's 15 to 30 minutes, 15 to 60 minutes. So it gives you some idea of how technology has advanced and what enables us moving forward. So we have new tools available that can help give a jump on both therapeutics and diagnostics. I next move to diagnostics. Diagnostics are central to preparedness. They're essential for identifying outbreaks, but also for guiding a smarter response in terms of the therapies we use, the way we apply the different interventions we have. New diagnostic tools are becoming faster and easier to use, including in outbreak settings. And they have a role that goes beyond outbreaks, also in tackling antimicrobial resistance and helping doctors use antibiotics more appropriately, but also to use antivirals more appropriately. And we've seen that for a number of decades now in the HIV area. On therapeutics, they're crucial for reducing severity and protect health systems and bridge the gaps where vaccines aren't available. But I want to put a caveat here that in these types of infections, the therapeutics, particularly the small molecule antivirals, they have to be used early. And if they're not used early, by the time you get the clinical onset of symptoms, it's often too late. So the role of them is to be used as expeditiously as possible. And that really puts pressure on our delivery systems. How can we achieve that? But we do see broad spectrum antivirals coming forward. We see virus family approaches being adopted, but there are still gaps. And what you'll hear tonight is a summary around the portfolio and some areas of gaps. So if we look at the 14 or so high-risk viral families, we have clinical activity currently in only half of them. That is a concern. The promise is that we have preclinical candidates, roughly double the number we had previously, but we all know there is a high attrition rate associated with that, so not all of them are going to make it. So this is an area that requires continued attention. And finally, I want to talk about delivery systems, because the science is moving faster than ever. We need to make sure delivery systems keep pace. And along with that are the policies. And a comment was made that at the IFPMA flagship event on Tuesday evening by somebody who said that the science is moving fast, but how can we have the policy catch up with it? So in order to enable, things need to move together at the same pace. So innovation can only deliver where three principles are aligned. The first is sustainable innovation ecosystems. So preparedness depends on innovation ecosystems that are stable before a crisis hits. It's what we do during peacetime, if you like. So ambitions like the 100-day mission, they're built on what science can deliver if all stakeholders play their part, progress is accelerated, and if we're able to ensure that we have the right types of partnerships in place. But for diseases that don't happen, but can be deadly, currently, unfortunately, there's often little incentive to invest. What we see is activity during outbreaks and then it fades and ends, and we have these droughts, if you like, between them. And so part of the challenge is how do we sustain the progress and make sure that we have systems that keep moving and keep generating the innovation in between. So another example of this is we see it not only in the antiviral and the pandemic space, but we also see it in the antimicrobial resistance space. And this is an area where we're trying, I think, as a global health community to fill those gaps and ensure that the reserve antibiotics are available when we need them. Then we have, I think, the second to point out is resilient healthcare systems and country readiness. And just a quick list of things we need to consider is strong primary healthcare, trained healthcare workers, functioning laboratories, and reliable and diversified supply chains. These are the things that allow us to turn scientific breakthroughs into real protection for people. And this is based upon routine immunization systems as well, and the routine use of vaccines, because that provides a foundation for emergency vaccination. And here I just want to point out an observation that I had the other day, and I was sitting across the table from an African health minister, and I was talking about community health workers and communities in Africa and confidence and vaccine confidence. And he said, we don't have a problem. And it was an interesting reflection, because I think that key advantage that many African communities have over the communities here is they still have communities that actually function as communities, and where there is respect and where people with knowledge are listened to and elders are listened to, and there is the ability to actually shape the type of confidence that's needed to implement effective responses to outbreaks. We also need of course, the surveillance and diagnostic capacity, regulatory and procurement systems, because if we don't have those, the benefits of innovation are erased. So just finally, a reflection on enabling conditions. For innovation to come forward, we need predictable financing. We need predictable financing for the procurement of those, including zero-day financing for outbreaks. We can't be scrambling for financing when interventions are available and they need to be deployed. Regulatory resilience and emergency review pathways are critical, and allow trusted regulatory authorities to move faster together than working in silos. So that reliance and convergence is absolutely critical. We need functioning clinical trial networks. This is going to be incredibly critical in the outbreak we're seeing at the moment, if any of the existing repurposed interventions are to move forward. And then we also need, on the broader perspective, other enabling conditions, including resilient supply chains. Open trade is critical. We need to make sure that interventions can get into countries quickly, unencumbered. Intellectual property protection in order to drive innovation, and legal certainty, including no-fault compensation systems, so life-saving tools can be deployed rapidly and confidently. When these conditions are in place, innovation can move at speed to those that need it and ensure that the best science can reach people in areas where historically it's struggled. So in closing, we have the upcoming UN high-level meeting on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response ahead of us. And that is a real opportunity to move from commitment, capability, and to ensure innovation systems, frameworks reinforce each other. We should be ambitious. We need to be ambitious, and we need to work together. The innovation landscape is genuinely powerful, and decision-making will remain critical to ensuring that scientific progress translates into real impact for patients. And one thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we have confidence in the science that we bring forward. We can't have people think that we're cutting corners and ignoring quality and safety. We need to be talking about that as much as we're talking about efficacy in this context, because we're going to move fast, and it means we need to bring people with us fast through that journey, and it can only be done with trust. So thank you very much, and I look forward to this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, David. And one of the key tools, as David has mentioned, in improving health security and preparing for future health shocks is the ability to identify threats as quickly as possible and share that data widely. Early warning capabilities have been greatly enhanced by advances in epidemiology and surveillance, but it's not just about technological advances. So, to explain more, it is my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Katharina Lauer, Vice President of Data and Partnerships at Airfinity, whose work centers on turning complex, fragmented data into actionable intelligence for preparedness and strategy.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for putting this event together. I was asked to give a forward-looking, uplifting, exciting presentation to get everyone ready for our amazing panel. Now, I'm German, and my factory setting is unfortunately risk. We love to talk about problems. The glass is half empty, right? So I'll try to do my utmost best to get you really excited about what's to come. Okay. Right. So today we're here to discuss how we innovate for health security. And I hope that in my presentation, I will fully convince you to rethink how systems function in practice, because as we've just heard, this is actually a systems discipline, and we need to start treating it like one. So, because I think very much when we think about health system innovation, we often jump immediately to technology innovation, right? So the next great sequencing machine. But I think we often forget that the ecosystem actually needs a lot more than just technology. And we've just heard this. It's really important that we start challenging maybe how institutions work, that we start thinking about how the law can support, for example, early detection, how behavior influences that space. And I think all of these together form the health innovation ecosystem for health security. So I would say maybe by the end of the presentation, I've convinced you that the biggest frontier in health security will actually not be technological. So yeah, let's see. Okay, so I thought I'm going to start by talking about why are we still talking about innovation, why it is important. And as we've just seen, the threat landscape in infectious diseases is continuous, right? This picture just shows you a map, and every single one of these pins is an outbreak. And this is only data from the last couple of weeks. So no one can probably say we don't have a continuous problem. I would say we're at war with the microbes, right? So, and if we just look at what has happened in the last week, so the picture on the right side is actually from my archive. This was taken in, I think, 2015. I was in West Africa during the Ebola epidemic. So it really pains me to see that we've come a long way, but we're still not there, right? And if we just look at the situation we're in currently, BDBV lacks approved therapeutics. We have no BDBV vaccines that are specifically for BDBV. And the Ebola diagnostics landscape for BDBV is quite dire as well, because it's invisible to all approved field tests. Oh, this has not moved. Okay. So meaning we can detect it, but we need a well-equipped lab to actually detect it. So what can we do to actually move to an innovation ecosystem that supports us in innovating at the right, like turning the right levers? And I think a big part of this is looking at how the public and the private sector participants innovate. So I have seen a lot of public sector participants here in the room. And I would say the public sector's innovation strategy is mainly geared for safety, equity, and accountability. And then if we look into the real world, right, when we want to respond to an outbreak, overwhelmingly countermeasures come from the private sector. The private sector is critical in logistics and distribution, and the information environment, which we have seen become a lot more important, is also largely private, right? So private sector has different different goals when it comes to innovation, right? So it's often we innovate for speed, we're rewarded for risk taking, and iterative failure is baked in. And of course, we maximize mainly for stakeholder value. So we have these two systems technically need to work together in an overall system that is based on capitalism. So we need to, I think, accept that this is the case, and we need to both start understanding how the other sector works to actually make a move and move innovation forward. Okay. So now I said we shouldn't talk too much about technology innovation, but I was very lucky that over the last couple of weeks, I got to travel a fair bit, go to conferences, go to meetings, and listen to some of the latest innovations that have happened in the health security space. And I thought, I'm going to take you on that journey. And it actually made me really hopeful, and I got really excited about what I've seen. So I'm going to start with one of the innovation areas that I thought has made tremendous progress. And I think the COVID pandemic was one of the big drivers behind that. Surveillance, right? Detect earlier, but also maybe look at different signals. So wastewater surveillance, environmental surveillance have really grown and picked up. So we've moved from doing, only polio surveillance to COVID surveillance, and now we see many respiratory diseases being surveyed. But we've also moved into adjacent areas to understand, how diseases move, spread, and employ data points that are maybe a little bit different to what we've traditionally done. So we look at, for example, Google search trends, we look at behavioral surveillance, and they can create a picture that often informs us that there's something going on, even before people hit, the clinic. And maybe just to give you one very exciting example, which I saw last week in a security conference, is a company that works on single molecule genomic detection. Why is that important? If you think about a cup of coffee, for example, black coffee cup, and you drop one drop of milk into it, you will not change the color of your coffee. And this technology actually enables you to find that drop of milk and makes you realize there's actually milk in the coffee, right? So you have normally samples, particularly from the environment, that are full of other stuff, and that confounds really what you're looking for. And they are working on technologies that enable you to see even the small bits in your sample. And then we've just heard how important it is that we think more about behavior, about sentiment, particularly when we respond to outbreaks. And it is something that I think we're embracing more. We're understanding more how important it is to include in health security strategies. Okay, then I thought I'm going to talk a little bit about data integration and curation, and I hope I'm not going to lose the room immediately, because normally when I start nerding out on data, I can see people snoozing off immediately. So why is this so important? I think it's often quite abstract, the concept, right? We talk about linking fragmented and diverse data into interoperable, decision-ready data sets that inform then intelligent decision-making and actions. But what does that actually mean? And I want you to think of data as the underwear, right? The underwear we base all our decisions on. So it needs to be high quality, it needs to be accurate, it needs to represent what's actually happening in the real world. And if you've ever gone on a bike ride and you've worn the wrong underwear, you know how uncomfortable it can get, right? So it's something that we often forget. It's boring to do, but it's super important to get right. And what I've seen over the last weeks in particular is advances in AI really help us to do these boring bits where we in the past had to employ, hundreds of data curators to maintain data sets at this high quality level they need to be, which can now actually be done at scale by an AI system. So I hope that all the smart minds that had to sit there and clean data can now focus on the big decisions that need to be taken and made to move health security forward for that reason. And actually, I mentioned one organization here, which is the European Molecular Biology, European Bioinformatics Institute, for one reason, because they have hosted molecular data sets for many decades. And they are actually one of these organizations that get the public-private partnership model really well. They have an industry program that is really flourishing and ongoing. And we've seen really big successes, such as, for example, AlphaFold come out of the collaboration with Google. So if you're interested in really good models of public-private partnerships, you should probably reach out to them. Okay. The next thing I think that we've really made a big jump particularly since the COVID pandemic is simulation and decision tools. You probably remember during COVID, the hippest thing, the latest thing was dashboards. Everyone had to have a dashboard which provided some form of situational overview of what was going on, which is a nice, it's nice to have. And I think it already helps to support decisions. But of course, it doesn't actually help you to model a scenario. A decision maker to understand, if I pull one lever, what is the outcome going to be? Do I go into lockdown on the 5th of December or on the 10th of December? And how does this change actually my outcome? How many more people will die if I don't do that? And I think now we've moved to models that help us make these decisions maybe a little bit more visible, particularly for people who maybe don't come from the math space, right? So I've seen dashboards where you can input your own data about your population, your geography, weather, historical epidemiology data, and you select your intervention methods like your PPE, etc. And then they output you and give you a range of what you can expect if you pull certain levers, which is great. And I think it really can give decision makers confidence in the difficult decisions they have to take. And then, of course, we can't talk about technology without talking about AI. And if you want the German version, the real German version of this talk, then you find me later and I tell you all about the risks. But it's really, really great to see the advances it has helped us to make. And Aurelia, the deputy CEO of CEPI, is in the room. I think I've seen her earlier. And they've just come out with a pandemic preparedness engine in support of the 100 Days mission. And I invite you to look at their website because what I can read there is really, really exciting. Really utilizing, the positives of AI to drive forward things such as risk assessments, antigen design, vaccine libraries, etc. And maybe to end that point on another really, really exciting innovation that I have seen just last week. And I mean, the term sounds a bit like out of science fiction movie, scientific superintelligence and autonomous labs. So this essentially means you don't need a person in your lab anymore. It's fully automated. I am being told, for example, in Japan, these systems are already being built. And you can imagine the scale of what can be achieved if we have, autonomous labs that run 24/7 with, I guess, a lot better reproducibility than what we can currently offer in the majority of our labs. Okay, but as I alluded to earlier in my presentation, I think one of the reasons why we're struggling so much to, make big leaps in health security is that we maybe don't pay enough attention to things such as finances, incentives, institutional innovation. And I think it's because they're often hard, right? Changing a law is hard. Changing the way an organization has worked for 20 years is hard. And it's often very uncomfortable having to do these things. But there are examples of where, these things have been achieved. So if I talk about financial innovation, maybe one thing to highlight is I have good friends that work in the insurance sector, and they are trying to combine pandemic insurance with contingent lending to kind of strengthen fiscal preparedness, economic resilience. So these type of concepts are maybe something, where we can really turn the dial in the future. Or let's look at institutional innovation. Again, I've just come back from the US, from a conference organized in the security space by Inquitel. And they have put together a program where the government can align their private priorities with private capital and support innovation pipelines that are then immediately being tested in the government. And at the end of that testing phase, they can decide if they go ahead and purchase it or not. Essentially, you do you have a co-innovation model where whatever you innovate is constantly being used and tested already by these government entities. And I was absolutely blown away by what was actually shown at this conference. And then maybe the last thing to talk about is thinking about incentives differently. And again, coming back to one of my previous slides, when we think about how much of the detection and response capabilities sit in the private sector, we can no longer afford to pretend that they sit on the other side of the fence. So somehow, in that system we find ourselves in, we need to find ways of working together with them and creating incentives. And here, maybe something like tax vehicles, preparedness credits, they have been proposed in the literature as something we need to look at a little bit more carefully. Okay, so I hope with my presentation I have convinced you that the next breakthrough in health security may not be a new sequencing machine, but maybe something boring, like we agree on some data standards or incentives or create new public-private partnerships that allow every signal to become action.
Thank you so much, Katharina. And I think you did a really good job of teeing us up for the panel discussion there. So thank you very much indeed for doing part of my job for me. That's great. So I would like to now introduce our panelists to take their seats on the stage. Please welcome Thomas Sila, Senior Vice President of Virology at Gilead and board member of the Intrepid Alliance, which brings together industry, governments and partners to accelerate the development of antivirals for high-risk viruses. Regis Gervier, Global Head, mRNA Centre of Excellence at Sanofi, which focuses on innovative vaccine and therapeutics development. Benina Laurent-Ledru, Chief Public Health and Government Affairs Officer for bioMérieux, a leading in vitro diagnostics company. And Joy Kumapi, co-chair of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board and a former Minister of Health for Botswana. Please welcome the speakers. Okay, panelists, we're going to start by taking a look at the impact of innovation and where we're seeing advances. And Thomas, let me start with you. Both David and Katerina spoke about the Ebola outbreak, and right now that really underlines the huge importance of antivirals in health security. Maybe offer us a thought on that, but also talk to us about the huge promise that we're seeing in new innovative approaches in therapeutics and antivirals, which are offering such great potential.
Well, thank you. First, thank you very much for inviting me for the panel. I think I really look forward to the stimulating discussion. And the innovation in biomedical science just cuts across all therapeutic areas, right? It is not specific for antivirals or anti-infectives. And nowadays, things are primarily focused on the design of the new molecules. And when we talk about antivirals, we can discuss the small molecules versus the biologics. And the small molecule space is the chemistry space that is almost infinite, right? There are billions and billions of combinations, how you can combine atoms into the small molecules. And now, how do you sift through that chemical space, right? So there are a number of new technologies that allow, for example, very high, ultra high throughput screening against the targets and binding of the large libraries that basically encompasses billions of the compounds, right? And that is actually deployed across the drug discovery in general. The antiviral space also benefits from it, perhaps a little bit less because it also depends on the level of funding, and we will talk about it later. The technologies, how quickly you can set up new types of the assays and readouts, the way how you actually can generate the molecular structures of your targets, right? The old-fashioned X-ray crystallography is now being retired, and the cryo-electron microscopy that actually helped us even at Gilead solve the structures of the proteins from the different viruses that have not been solvable for 20 years, for example. And that allows you to get the access to the primary information, how your target can potentially look like, and then you can start designing the small molecule compounds. And there are new types of the chemical structures that allow weak degradation of the viral proteins, for example. But in the end, it really comes to a decision point, which target you're going to follow in your drug discovery, right? And there comes a really strong and fast tools of the bioinformatics where you can compare your sequence of your target protein, whether it is the virus polymerase or protease or some kind of the protein that enables the entry into into the target cells. So you can look at that diversity across the whole families of the viruses, the different strains and different variants, and that helps you decide actually what is the best target in terms of the covering all these different viral variants. And the bioinformatics are much faster, actually. The tools are much faster than they used to be. And so I think we have a really huge selection of the tools that should allow us to accelerate the process. In the end, it really comes to the commitment from the stakeholders.
And Katerina was talking about how AI has really made a difference in terms of R&D. How is it impacting on antiviral R&D?
The impacts are sort of quite similar, I think, to the other therapeutic areas, because the knowledge of the designing of the new molecules by AI is actually transferable. It's much easier to do that on the biologic side, in terms of the antibodies, for example, because when we talk about antibodies, that's really the platform approach that is coming from the design and predicting the structures of the new proteins, including antibodies and the binders by AI. It's actually became very sophisticated, right? Katarina mentioned the AlphaFold and the Google DeepMind and the Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, who were awarded the Nobel Prize in 2024 for coming up with these predictive tools. They now have been significantly improved, and the precision and predictability of those tools have been improved by orders of magnitude just in the past 3 years or so. But that is really much more applicable to the side of the biologics, because the small molecule space, as I mentioned, is much bigger. It's much more vast. So the predictions of the small molecule structures and optimization, that's still it's in the process. But we are trying to implement the same tools also for small molecules. And there are many more properties that you actually need to optimize for the small molecule. It's just not the binding to the target, right? It's the pharmacokinetic properties and such. So the AI actually is impacting the decision points throughout the whole cycle of drug discovery as well as the development.
Thank you, Thomas. Regis, we're seeing the race on now to try and develop a vaccine for this particular strain of Ebola. What it does is really highlight the critical importance of development and delivery of vaccines. Where are you seeing the greatest innovations in those areas?
Thank you very much for the question. And I'm very happy to be with you tonight for this panel. I think you have to go back a little bit in the COVID story. In 2021, when we saw the acceleration in the development of this vaccine, it was relying on a platform, definitively, mRNA technology developed for decades, to be honest, to reach this stage. But there were underlying, as you mentioned, evolution of new technologies, innovation that were progressing very, very fast at an exponential phase around design of protein, prediction of the design, computational science, structure biology, etc., etc. And the convergence of all this technology helped really accelerate the COVID development. Since then, this has even more accelerated. When you look at the mRNA field, I don't know if you are completely aware of it, but the number of patents around mRNA technology still today is roughly 350 per year patents, new patents.
350 patents, yeah.
Every year, which is roughly 700% of growth every single year on the number of innovation around it. This is mind-blowing. This means also that this technology is only at its infancy, and we're going to see more and more application, more and more fast application on this technology. Now, as we were discussing a bit with Katerina, if you want to succeed in employing all this innovation across the value chain, from discovery, development to industrialization, you need to make sure that you applied all this technology at all the steps. And I can give you some example, but you need to make sure also that your data are fully integrated end-to-end, which is already difficult to do in a private industry, even more complex when you have different actors, public, private, that need to share the data. And I think if there is really a call for urgency, as you said, to make sure that we develop and we put money on the data continuum dimension between the different entities, because the secret is to have access to the data.
Because during the COVID pandemic, it was mRNA technology which eventually allowed us to develop a vaccine. But as you're saying, we need multiple technologies which are available. So
Correct.
What do you think are the biggest lessons that we've learned?
Yeah. So maybe let's finish a bit on the innovation dimension, something that we should be aware also today, based on what we all experience in Sanofi with mRNA technology and with AI, plug to it. I can tell you that I can do a design of a sequence and selection of a sequence with the best probability of success on the road in development, only in silico without any experiment. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations in silico in order to then select up to 10 maybe sequence that you can screen after in vivo, so that you can accelerate dramatically the cycle time of discovery. Second, in the CMC space, you know that it's one thing to have the antigen, it's another thing to produce it. You need a process, you need a platform for that. Today, with mRNA techno, we are able to have digital twin that allow us to predict the performance of your process without any experimentation, because we plug by design all the characteristics of quality, yield, performance in the mRNA sequence design at the beginning. And it's something that even myself was not believing it in the beginning, but we reach this point, which makes us progress very fast and can be applied for any given outbreak as soon as we have to activate this technology. After, to your point around the diversity of platform, I think we need to be completely aware that the maturity of a platform to answer to an outbreak is not only pure science. There are different dimensions behind it. You can have a platform for sure which perform and you can use from one antigen to another, but you need the full ecosystem to produce it, the full ecosystem to distribute it, and you need to make sure that according to the pattern of outbreak, nature of the pathogen, population you want to target, so geography you want to distribute, you may not activate exactly the same technology to go fast to address the outbreak. So mRNA technology is one, but we know a little bit the drawback. Thermostability is not yet there, complex to crack. But we have other technology like the mix technology that we have in Sanofi, 70 years of knowledge around this techno. Remember in 2009, H1N1 pandemic, we deliver the doses in 3 months with egg technology. So we shouldn't put in the bin technologies that have been proven, safe, efficient, highly productive, cheap, that still exist in the network. And we are also investing on recombinant protein. And that's why today, between mRNA, recombinant protein, eggs technology, we are continuing to invest in R&D, doing clinical trial, adjuvanted clinical trial, new design of antigen, but also in CMC and in manufacturing so that we can keep the capacity not only for the commercial product, but also to answer to any outbreak.
Yeah, we'll talk about how we can speed up systems a little later on. Thank you. Vanina, we've talked about COVID, Ebola, antivirus. Every time we see a new outbreak or pandemic, we realize just how important diagnostics are for health security. What are some of the most exciting innovations that you're seeing today in diagnostics for preparedness?
Yes, and thank you very much for the invite. It's great to see the distinguished audience in the room. We've seen it, yes, after COVID, that basically diagnostic moved from a lab function to really a core health security capability. And that's really stating the obvious, but I will still say it. They are absolutely essential so that you can not only see the threat, but that you can size it and then that you can appropriately act upon it. We see 3 types of innovations right now. The first one is probably the most exciting. It's how we're moving from single test to integrated diagnostics ecosystems that can generate actionable intelligence. We refer to that really the need of the decision makers on the ground that need to make quick decisions and equip your frontline workers. So that's really the most exciting type of innovation. And we have syndromic molecular testing that has changed the speed and the operational ability of those decision makers. The second type of innovation related to that is we also see how diagnostics are moving now much more into fever and emerging pathogen preparedness. And talking about Ebola, one thing that is truly important is to have the preparedness. And as David mentioned, you need to have it done before the crisis hit. So in our case, our company BioFire Defense has an FDA-cleared test that works on the Budibongyo strain.
Right.
And that is what preparedness is actually about, is to make sure that you have done the work before, that you've not only tested again the previous Ebola strains, but we have it and it's working. And right now we are actually speeding up manufacturing to meet the public health needs. So that's, I think, again, what being ready before crisis hits looks like. The second type of innovation is really time to therapy innovation. And in our solutions, it's really to make sure that we can provide, again, the signals for targeted therapy and stewardship. And I'll maybe come back to this. And then there's AI, because that's the question that you're not asking, but I will address it. And I will address it in maybe a little bit of a different tack that my colleagues and Joy maybe have a view on this. And because it's the end of the week and you've all heard about AI as being the magic bullet, I will be super pragmatic and saying it's not necessarily the answer. It's the acceleration layer. It's the way to make you much more powerful again in your decision making. But unless, of course, you have the high quality connected data, it's going to be investing probably in what is the new sexy object at the risk of not investing in the real capabilities that are needed right here, right now.
Without data, AI can't really take anything forward.
Yeah, it's again, and the data needs to be interoperable. It's not sexy indeed, but it is critical. If you cannot really assess what you are truly looking for, then what good is it? And you need to have it validated, and you need to really trust the data, obviously. So all of those components at the end amount to the quality of the data that you need. But it's really the governance message that matters here. You also need to invest in the fundamentals at the beginning. So it's something that is very obvious. And I like to say often that no test, no data, no decision.
Oh my goodness.
It starts with the test. And I'm sorry to say, you need to make sure that you actually have the ability to understand what you're looking at.
Absolutely. Can I pivot a little bit here, because for obvious reasons, we've talked quite a lot about Ebola, but also substantial concern right now about antibiotic resistance, which is a huge threat to health security. Talk us through how diagnostics can help with AMR and antimicrobial stewardship.
Yes, so I know you are a very distinguished audience, but I will still start with the basics. By 2050, drug-acquired infections are probably going to kill more than cancer. And stewardship is about preserving the most precious resource we have in public health, and that is antibiotics. That's what stewardship is about. But yet we see that up to 50% of all antibiotics worldwide are not appropriately used. Mm-hmm. And diagnostics is basically the fastest way to change this. So that's really why we believe that stewardship at the beginning is first and foremost a decision discipline. And that's why you need to make sure that you are making evidence-based decisions. Again, seeing what you need to see to make those decisions. So basically, if clinicians don't have the diagnostics that they need, they are forced to prescribe large spectrum antibiotics or antibiotics just in case, because at the end of the day, no one wants a patient to die when he or she comes to your healthcare setting. And that's why we strongly believe that diagnostics are the best health security lever that we have, because it's preventing, at the end of the day, AMR from being the most massive cross-border health threat that we've ever seen.
And are we seeing that gain traction? Because we've been talking about AMR for quite a while now.
And that's where I believe that maybe I'll draw from my past. I've worked a lot in climate and health, and it's been sad to see that decades of advocacy on climate change have completely failed to change things. And there's one thing that has actually worked, and Katarina, you alluded to it: economic incentives. If you do not create the right incentives, then it's very hard to actually change behaviors. So I'll say two things. One, in Africa, only 1% of African labs currently can perform routine antimicrobial resistance testing. 1%.
1%.
So that's about what we choose to see. And the second thing is about what we choose to fund today. And that's an anecdote that was reported by the Africa CDC at a recent panel. In 22, 1 million AMR-associated deaths were recorded on the African continent. 1 million, against an investment of about $200 million. The same year, 600,000 deaths were related to HIV, which mobilized $12 billion. So it's also saying a great deal about what we choose to see and what we choose to fund collectively. So yes, AMR, first of all, try to talk about it at your dinner table. No one will want to have the conversation because no one gets it. So if people don't get it and don't get the urgency and the magnitude of the crisis, well, we'll figure it's never going to be coming to the fore as a really general public issue. And the second thing is really about economic incentives.
Thank you, Vanina. Joy, let's bring the conversation back to innovation. I mean, one thing the Ebola outbreak has done is underlining the importance of strengthening preparedness and response. Can I ask you about the government perspective? How are countries using innovation to strengthen their preparedness and response?
I'll start by thanking you for inviting me here. Our response as an observer, because as you know, I'm not running any country at the moment. I'm just supporting and primarily criticizing them, which they probably don't like. I'm
sure you have insights,
which they probably don't like. But
share the secrets.
But if you look at the degree of use of innovation in this particular space, innovative solutions, let's say pre-COVID, we only had 7 countries actually, which were able to do next generation genomic sequencing. Now there are 53. So that's what the impact of COVID has done. So I think COVID has incentivized a lot of countries to appreciate the importance of this. We still have challenging areas. We need more innovative solutions in the area of data collection. I mean, I'm sure all of you are familiar with GPAP, which is the Global Pandemic Alert and Response, and which relies on predictive surveillance, early warning using AI, and multi-source analytics. But this is analytics for different areas, for genetics themselves, pathogen data, climate, mobility data, and all this data has to be correct in order to be able to feed into this analytical process that the AI is going to be doing. And there is a great appreciation for that. So a lot of countries are investing in data systems and use of digital systems and AI in order to improve data collection, but also the analytics. So there's a lot going on there. But there are countries that have also appreciated some of the innovations. There was somebody here who talked about wastewater monitoring. Ginkgo Waterworks, for example, has worked with at least 2 African countries that I know of in helping, testing wastewater from planes, and also wastewater from buses and truckers that are coming in through borders, crossing across the border. This was very useful during the multi-country mpox outbreak. So, and this can be used for many other areas, in a lot of other areas as well. It's just that at the moment, the capacity has not yet been developed, but there's an appreciation that this innovation is required. The capacity has not yet been developed, and engaging experts like Ginkgo is expensive for the countries. But the UNICEF, for example, is working with a lot of countries on the microarray patches, for vaccinations, right, because this will make it easier for vaccinations to be adopted even in an emergency. Because we have found that during COVID, there was a huge drop in immunization of children. A massive drop. So if we had simpler delivery mechanisms like this would help not just with the outbreak, but also with the diseases that normally plague children, that can also lead to disease outbreaks in children like measles, etc., which we need to prevent. So there has been a lot of investments in these types of innovations, but there are also innovations in the areas of systems. For example, there is One Health interface that have been developed by some countries, which still need a lot of work. But they said
One Health interface.
Yeah, World Health interface between human and animal and environmental health. Right. So that you have the data systems talking to one another, so that the 3 of them are interoperable. So there is a lot of work that is ongoing there.
So what is the real world impact that you're seeing? Because we know Africa, there is an Africa-led move to move towards more sovereignty and autonomy over their health systems. What kind of real world impact are you seeing?
Well, I think the real world impact is that well, I think for the COVID and pandemic outbreak related interventions, we saw it with Mpox. We were able to keep Mpox out of countries like Botswana through the early detection systems. So that was a huge contributor. With the genomic surveillance as well, we have been able to use this. And it will help us with any other disease outbreak. But of course, there's a lot of improvement that needs to be done and upgrading that needs to be done. But and there's one technology which I thought was extremely useful that came with COVID as well, but that we have been able to use since. It's something that was introduced by UNICEF. It's not scientific, but it is, they call them rapid deployable health emergency facility. So it is a plan of a full hospital, which you can rapidly put in place within a week. You have a full hospital, full equipment with the intensive care facilities, laboratories, operation rooms, everything.
All in place.
Everything.
Right.
Yes. So that is an innovation that is practical and that is sort of systems related, but is not a scientific in nature, but has helped a lot during disease.
Yes, well, as Katerina says, not all advances have to be technological. Joy, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's drill down a little bit into the challenges and the bottlenecks and look at how delivery systems can be strengthened. Thomas, the Intrepid Alliance has just released its latest pipeline landscape, which highlights major gaps in antiviral R&D. And you were talking a little bit about some of the challenges earlier. What are the key challenges in developing antivirals?
So first I really would like to acknowledge the contributions of the Intrepid Alliance, right? Because that is the coalition of the 7 pharma companies that was built at the peak of the COVID pandemic. And the CEOs made a decision that basically the scientists as well as policymakers will get together, form this coalition. And one of the missions is identifying the challenges and the gaps in the antiviral small molecule space. So we do a lot of landscape mapping, as you mentioned, and really keep close eye on the 14 different viral families that are at the sort of priority list by WHO and other health organizations. And among those 14 families, most of the viruses do have some kind of the level of the preclinical research and drug discovery. But when you look into any stage of the drug development, from phase 1 studies in healthy volunteers all the way to the efficacy large-scale registrational studies, there are about half of those families that are basically dry, right? There is nothing that's happening there. And it's really all about the commitment, right? Because I can contrast one side is chronic viral diseases that are highly prevalent, the HIV or hepatitis C, for example. HIV had a 40 years of the drug discovery history. First 15 years were very, very challenging, but through sustained investment and the focus, now we have more than 40 different antivirals for HIV that have been approved. The HIV brought us some major concepts of the breakthrough, whether it was a single tablet once daily regimen that really facilitated the compliance, and all the way to the most recent innovations, the long-acting prevention for the HIV. And all these concepts can actually be applied to the other antiviral areas. There is just not that support from the funders, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector.
What is the Intrepid Alliance doing to try and...
So Intrepid Alliance is doing 2 things. One is basically identifying the gaps, because we really need to understand objectively what is in the pipeline, right? What is the global landscape across the different stages of the preclinical and clinical development? against the major viral families with the pandemic threat. So once you identify that, I think we have done a really thorough job, and that was also thanks to the partnership with Airfinity, by the way. And then you have to do something about it, right? So the next stage is basically the trying to impact the policy and advocacy and put in place strategies for the advocacy with the funder, whether it's the BARDA, HERA, departments of the defense, ministries of health, where they really would need to deploy some funding. Now, it's not just the funding, actually, that is a systemic problem. I think it's also the drainage of the talent from the virology and infectious disease in general. And I can tell you one quick thing. Okay, the COVID-19 pandemic should have been such a huge lesson that should cause the boom of the virology, and it's actually completely opposite, right? I think the number of the experts who are actively doing the drug discovery R&D in virology is probably less now than it was before the COVID.
Astonishing. I imagine that there'd be a boom in the number of people wanting to specialize.
I think that there is some, my explanation personally is there is some kind of fatigue, right, in the investment, because COVID-19 has drained a lot of investments, and not necessarily always into the most meaningful ideas, right, or the drug classes. And I think that is the piece that is missing now and needs to be brought back to the fold and renewed, right? And hopefully that will also bring back the talent and interest, the private sector also. I mean, Gilead, I'm proud to say, it's one of the few companies that remain fully dedicated to the virology space over the past 30 years. But that's not the case with every pharma and biotech company.
Oh, interesting. Regis, in her presentation earlier, Katerina made the point that public systems were built for safety and accountability, but not speed. So in your opinion, what kind of regulatory levers do we need that would accelerate vaccine innovation?
Yeah, indeed. There are many avenues that we could activate, actually. Some of them are already existing technically, but there is a change of behavior and mindset that we need to bring in the ecosystem. I will mention notably leverage the platform framework. When you use an mRNA technology or even a clone technology, let's say for monoclonal, also a CHO technology, these are platforms, so you can really accelerate your registration and dossier review by leveraging this notion. There is a common base that is completely agnostic from the antigen you are targeting. For this, we need to really work all together with authorities, regulators, to make sure that we use this vehicle to accelerate the acceptation of the different new products. The second element is, which is not rocket science, it's active rolling submission, meaning that do not wait to have all your data package to start to review the dossier. So authorities, regulators should live at the same time you progress in science, making sure that you can exchange the data, and on a daily basis, you really review with authorities your dossier. And you can make sure that you can also correct the trajectory. Anything that you can discover during the discovery and the development will help you to tune your final solution. One element that is very important and that will debottleneck really the global access, it's what we call the reliance, regulatory reliance, making sure that we trust science, we trust the authorities that are reviewing a dossier once, and we don't review it second time, third time, fourth time, systematically you go in a new country. This will help effectively to accelerate also access, to simplify, to streamline the overall process. Real world evidence is one, complementing the clinical trial. If you want to go fast, really relying on biomarkers upfront and making sure that after you can, with the real world data, confirm your hypothesis to start with. For sure, it has to go with what we are saying and what David was saying. We need to trust the science. We need to trust also the partners and making sure that in full transparency, we exchange the data, we exchange the conclusion, and we can really collectively progress on. Last but not least, very simple potentially, but very crucial. It's what I call the paperless dimension. Remove the paper factory, right?
Remove the paper factory.
What I mean by that is, if you have a box of vaccine, don't put anything on it, just a QR code. And when the box is arriving in a country, you have a direct download of your leaflet with the right language, with the right elements in it, so that the prescribers and the users can really understand what they have in their hand. And this you can redirect your doses according to the outbreak as you wish, just sending the box to another country without changing the overall, I would say, packaging, labeling dimension, which is around. This is crucial if you want to accelerate.
And a really simple idea. So if we look at in-country structures, we know that countries during the COVID pandemic, countries that had established flu vaccination programs, for example, were able to vaccinate against COVID on a much larger scale than countries that didn't have those immunization programs. So my question is, how should countries then think about routine immunization as part of the core infrastructure for preparedness and health security?
Yeah, so I make an analogy with sport, right? So I'm a marathonian runner, and when you want to run and to hit the target in due time, you have to train before, right? We were saying we need to train the system before the pandemic hit. It's typically the case. If you have a seasonal vaccine program in countries, it helps us to really build the muscle, operational muscles around vaccination, going from the distribution up to the practitioners. So you have all the tools in place in order to make sure that if the pandemic hit, you are ready to activate the system. So it's really all about it will help you to increase the vaccine coverage rate, definitively. It will help you also to train the infrastructure, operational infrastructure, regulatory infrastructure, so that you can be ready at any time. So that this leverage that every single country needs to understand at the end of the day, you don't start the race when the pandemic hit.
If you've got systems in place,
yeah,
it is so much easier. And Vanina, just taking that thought a little further, being able to scale rapidly is a huge part of pandemic preparedness. So when we look at a resilient diagnostic ecosystem, what is needed to allow it to surge in a crisis?
I think, first of all, important to understand that a resilient diagnostic ecosystem, as you call it, it's not a catalog of technology. It has to be an infrastructure designed for routine and crisis surge. And for this, we see 4 qualities that are needed for an ecosystem. The first one, a tiered laboratory networks and clear roles allocated, similar to vaccines. If you do not exercise the muscle, it's not going to be working in times of crisis. So you need to make sure that frontline testing through regional reference labs, all of this exists, and that we can actually then activate those when there's a crisis. The second, of course, we discussed robust quality systems and workforce readiness, because in a crisis, unreliable data damages much more than the actual patients that are concerned. It erodes trust, and that's the worst thing. One quick note, Joy, you alluded to One Health, and we have invested in wastewater surveillance. We are also able to link our animal health, human health, and environmental health panels. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because it is super interesting to see that you can actually predict outbreaks weeks before patients appear in clinics through decentralized wastewater surveillance. So definitely something that can allow us to act before outbreaks spread and not necessarily react to them. The third component we see, again, we mentioned it, but worth reminding, it's all about digital data integration and interoperability. And again, it requires collective decision-making to make sure that we can, ensure that results flow into surveillance systems. And the fourth, surge activation mechanisms. I mentioned that what we have, for instance, on Ebola is FDA cleared. Well, you need to make sure that you have pre-agreed mechanisms, and that is an enormous amount of work that needs to be done before, and that's where public-private partnerships enormously change the game. And again, you create the trust, you create the conditions for those surge mechanisms to be ready before any crisis hits.
Just very quickly, because I'm aware of the time, but just a brief word about initiatives that I know that you're involved in. Go DX Compact to expand diagnostics access, and the AMR Industry Alliance. Briefly, how is that allowing innovation to align with preparedness and AMR strategies?
Yeah, I'll just say one very simple word. Sorry, I think innovation stops when there's fragmentation. And those partnerships, they allow you to break fragmentation. It's very simple. Basically, it allows you not to have fragmented funding. It allows you not to have fragmented incentives, or it allows you not to have fragmented implementation, which is the worst. So to give two concrete examples, at the One Health Summit, which was held in Lyon in April, a new compact has been launched, the Go DX, and Go DX stands for Go Diagnostics, in case anyone wonders. And it's really a One Health approach, trying to tie all those signals into really one predictable system. So that's, again, working all together that we can achieve this. And the second thing, the AMR Industry Alliance that is organized and hosted by IFPMA is, again, a practical example of what good looks like when industry comes together and really try to put all its brains and muscles to solve a crisis such as antimicrobial resistance.
Always about the collaboration, isn't it? So that's a great example. Thank you. I am going to come to the audience for questions from you right after these last questions to Joy. David mentioned this, and actually when we were talking earlier, you mentioned this as well. The Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, you've got a new report out, A World on the Edge, which concludes the world is not substantially safer than it was a decade ago. And I think a decade ago, you were looking at the last Ebola outbreak. Of trust, inequities persist. What kind of actions, what critical actions do we need to take that you think we could achieve in the short term to try and overcome that lack of trust and those inequities?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. Those who are interested in the report, it is on our website, on the GPMB website, and it's very short, as you can see. So, what we feel needs to be, what is the question? What needs to be done?
What has to be done?
Because what has to be done?
I mean, it is astonishing that in a decade, we don't seem to have become any safer.
We are not learning. We have developed the solutions. We know what to do. I mean, an easy example is the current outbreak of Ebola in the DRC. We have had this team that has been working on the 100-day mission. Instead of doing it in the DRC, where they know there's definitely Ebola, the next outbreak is definitely coming to us, they go and do it in an easier country.
An easier country?
Yeah, Rwanda. So, right. So what I'm saying is that we tend to gravitate toward things that are easier to do. But in order to actually be prepared for the next pandemic, we have to do the hard things.
We need to work in the
We need to do the hard things. You can imagine if the 100-day mission had actually properly gone in and trained and developed the capacity in the DRC, we would not have this long delay because it took a long time for us to really realize that we have an Ebola outbreak, and it's a strain of Ebola. We're testing for the one that we are used to testing for, you see. So what I'm trying to say here is that there are a lot of hard things that need to be done. But we came up with 3 recommendations that are where we feel that there's this loss of trust that is actually leading to the huge regression. And the 3 recommendations are, first of all, that we need a comprehensive, multi-sectoral risk monitoring framework. and that is open and transparent, and that uses all the tools that we currently know. You know, with the One Health approach, the digitalization, using the AI tools, everything, interoperability between data collection systems. We need to put that in place, because that is what is going to alert us, you know, have an early warning system so that we can actually be able to be aligned with the 100-day mission. So, but in order to do this, we will need, of course, the research that all of you here are engaged in, and the development of medical countermeasures, and that level of investment. And then those medical countermeasures and solutions must be accessible. So that means they should be equity.
Yes.
Now, in order for you to have medical countermeasures, have them accessible, for there to be equity, there to be financing. Pre and during the pandemic. So I would say really, it is obvious. Everybody knows this. But when we did a risk assessment of the potential impact of the next pandemic, given where we are now, it will actually be worse than the previous one.
Worse?
Worse, yes, given the level of readiness where we are now. So because somebody talked here about fragmentation. We are fragmenting the solutions. We all know what to do, but we are not working together. We are working in little silos again. We all need to work together.
It's astonishing that we haven't learned that lesson.
It's amazing.
Can I just say, everyone knows what we mean by the 100 days mission, which we've talked about here. 100 days from identifying the microbe to creating a vaccine. Is that right?
Yes. And making it accessible.
And making it accessible, which is obviously the most important thing.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy. We've got time for a few questions from the audience. If anyone wants to ask, lady at the front here, I think we have a microphone for you. So just 1 second. There you go.
This is for you. You're just standing in front of your name, so I don't.
Regis.
About the QR code. I think the QR code is good, but maybe just a simple line about what it is inside, that would be also important. The reason is there's a serious issue of cybersecurity. Just the fact that there's nothing written on that might make all of the batches unusable. Absolutely. So.
That's a good point.
No, because actually, you need to have all the digital capabilities to be able to trace, read, and there are also counterfeiting protection on the boxes. So you need just to make sure that, as we were saying, the data system, digital tools are fully integrated so that you can use this type of approach. We tested live, it works. The point is, it helps you with specific readers to rapidly understand, first of all, what is in the box in a safe manner. But on the other side, it helps you really to adapt very quickly or to redirect doses from one country to another, one fit to another. Because today you have a bottleneck, very simple one. If you put paper labels or a label on the boxes, you will, at the end of the day, have to relabel, because regulation and compliance are different from one country to another. You have to readapt all these dimensions when you go, if you want to have the liberty to be able to distribute differently and to reorient your doses. So this is a game changer in terms of really share data, but you need to be equipped all along the value chain, that's for sure.
But your question was about cybersecurity, wasn't it? If someone hacks into the system, changes the information that QR code goes back to.
I see what you mean.
Then that renders the whole medicine.
But it's something we should take into account for sure.
Good question. Thank you. Another question. Lady at the end of the row there, in the white blouse. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was so interesting. fragmentation, one of the biggest fragmentations that's been happening in the last few years clearly is geopolitical and clearly is financial as we think about global health. And then we see many of the countermeasure discussions, especially on AMR recently as well, really refocusing on this security question, this defense question. There's potentially more investment that could come from that space. So, of course, it's understandable. But those budgets are even more nationalistic than other budgets that we've tried to fight for before. So how are you all dealing with that? And how does that help you? You're talking about working together. How does that help you? Or what do we need to break that so that we can work together better?
Who wants to take that? Joy.
I'll take it because it's a political question. And because it's the politicians really that are standing in our way. And there is going to be this meeting in September. And I think we need to be blunt. We need to be honest. Now, our biggest handicap is that our ministers of health here have not yet reached consensus on the pandemic agreement that should be going to that meeting in September. So I'm hoping we have actually urged them that even if they have to call a special meeting before September, that is what they should do. Because we cannot go to that meeting without a solid recommendation to the heads of state. It does not make sense. And in the meantime, the pandemics are not waiting for us. Since the last West Africa Ebola pandemic, we have had 10 epidemics of that have been of public health concern, 10, including the pandemic, of course, the COVID pandemic. So it means that these are becoming more and more frequent. So we must not delude ourselves into believing that another one is not coming. It's coming. So we do need to take this issue to the heads of state.
I think, isn't it, the chances of another pandemic is something like 50% in the next few years. So yeah, another pandemic is coming. Anyone else want to answer to that, Benina?
Maybe taking a little bit of a different viewpoint. I think there are two words that we should also keep in mind. One is resilience, and the other, I'll come back to this notion of public-private partnerships, because it is important to count on the right political leadership. Yet, I think experience has all taught us that you cannot expect everything from politicians. So what I'm trying to say is we should also feel accountability at every level. And we are all accountable in this room, because we will see one another in 2 months, and then in another 3 months, and then, so everybody bears some accountability in terms of the data sharing, in terms of the surge preparedness, in terms of really building this resilience muscle through those discussions that need to be more than just discussions when we meet at assemblies like World Health Assembly. So that's really probably a call to action to all of us, and I'm very much including industry in this, to continue building those mechanisms to equip then our political leaders with the right recommendations for them to act upon.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you. Gentleman in the fourth row there.
Thank you. I'm Sam from GHIT, Global Health and Innovative Technology Fund. My question is, you can just give concrete idea and action for co-creation between global North and South. Actually, as you know, that there are a lot of issues lying between global North and global South. So today we didn't hear anything about that one. So we really need to have a very concrete action, especially from industries, how to just work together with the global South.
Yeah. Anyone want to comment on that? Thomas?
I can perhaps start with some specific examples from the recent development of some antivirals, and particularly drug that Gilead just got approved last year, lenacapavir, that is the first drug that can be given for the HIV PrEP just once every 6 months. So that seemed to have a significant potential to change the course of HIV epidemic. But in order to be able to generate the amount of the data that would be required for the global registration of this product, there really had to be the international and global sort of consortium of the clinical study sites and the clinical trialists and investigators, and that basically included all kinds of the populations of the people who would potentially benefit from the HIV prevention. Among them, the underserved populations, such as, for example, the adolescent girls and young women in sub-Saharan Africa. And without connecting to that region and bring the experience into the South, this would never happen. And we are very grateful for that. And plus, now is actually as a consequence is a number of the countries that are most affected by HIV epidemic, they are really interested in bringing even the manufacturing of this drug in the country. And, we will be supporting that, enabling that. So that's one of the very clear, tangible examples where the connections can be created between the North and South. But I think it needs to be, in a way, the goal needs to be defined in a very specific way, and also the benefits for both sides so that it's clearly understandable why people should be building those connections.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on this? Is a very important point. It's really the bone of contention now with the negotiations between countries, because there is this pathogen and access, and benefit sharing. Basically, how do you make sure that in an endemic or an epidemic, the medical countermeasures that are developed, the technology is immediately shared. That's a global public good. Because we understand all the arguments about the cost but can you believe it that during COVID, we got the medical countermeasures 17 months after they were developed as the South. For Mpox, it was 24 to 27 months. And yet countries had them in stock, they had stockpiles of the vaccine. So we are not making progress. We have to find a solution. And the solution is not that we should just defend our position. We understand the position, whether it is the position of the countries, the sovereignty part, or of the industry, they need the investment. We understand all those arguments, but a solution must be found, because otherwise we are killing people.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to bring us to an end now because I'm aware that we are running over time. However, it doesn't stop you from asking questions, because we would love to invite you to join us for a networking reception. The speakers will be there. Please feel free to come and talk, because we really do value your insights and your input. And I do thank you for your questions. But please give one last round of applause for our wonderful speakers. Thank you, everyone. Drinks in the next room, refreshments. It's very warm in here, I know. So let's get some fresh air.